Hi, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I really appreciate how much you care about Jack and how you're always looking for ways to support him. I know you mentioned feeling like he's in a bad mood all the time, and when he's in that mood, nothing really seems to help. I completely understand how frustrating that may feel, and I'm here to reassure you we do have a way to understand what's going on that gives us more tools to actually help Jack. In our field, all behavior is a form of communication. So instead of thinking of tantrums of something as coming from a mood, we look at them as something that Jack does to maybe solve a problem or communicate a need in that moment. In our field of behavior science, we've learned that behavior doesn't just come out of nowhere or from something like a mood. It usually happens because of what's going on around the child. With Jack, we've noticed that his tantrums often happen when he's asked to move from something that he really likes, like playing with toys or a fun activity, to something that feels harder or less fun, like putting his toys away or starting his work at the table. These situations seem to be really tough for him. So instead of seeing the tantrum as proof that he's in a bad mood, we can see it as Jack's way of trying to get more time with the fun activity or to avoid the harder one. In other words, the tantrum is working for him, at least in the short term. That's why it keeps showing up. So an example that I like to use is, think of something that you're doing that is very enjoyable for you, like watching your favorite TV show, and then all of a sudden you have to go and do laundry or do dishes. I think even as adults, we might groan and say, oh, just one more minute with my TV show, and drag our feet to go do the tasks we don't want to do. This is something that's occurring with Jack as well. He just feels it a little bit stronger. Jack doesn't have all the same words or coping tools just yet, so his reaction comes out a little bit bigger. His tantrum is kind of like his version of saying, no, I don't want to, or give me more time. The really good thing about this is that these tantrums aren't random, and it's not about being in a bad mood all the time. It's actually very predictable. So when we know what sets off the tantrum, we can plan ways to help him through it and teach him some new skills. So some skills that I would recommend is preparing him for transitions. So for example, if we're going to do a sudden switch from playing with toys to doing work, we can give Jack a warning such as 2 more minutes and then we'll clean up. That way the change isn't a surprise. Another way we can do this is teach him the tools to communicate. So we can either teach him to say that he needs more time, or give him a card that says that he needs more time. And instead of having a tantrum, even if he can't always get that extra time, that mode of asking is a skill that gives him some form of control. Another thing that we can do is always give praise for small attempts. So whenever Jack even makes the smallest effort to transition without a tantrum, we'll always celebrate it with lots of praise, maybe a fun reward, our favorite toy, just to help him see that these calm transitions work a lot better than the tantrums. So instead of fixing on a bad mood, we'll focus on helping Jack build the skills he needs to handle these transitions. That's something that we can actually teach and support, and it makes a really big difference for both him and for you at home. Over time, hopefully you'll see fewer tantrums, smoother transitions, and Jack feeling more confident in his abilities to communicate his needs. And I also just want to reassure that you're not alone. We will work on this together so that you have the strategies to fit your family and daily routine. Now I want to explain why I chose to describe Jack's behavior in the way that I did. As a behavior analyst, I use technical language when I analyze behavior, but when communicating with parents, I want to translate it into language that's accurate yet easy to understand, just because this is already a very difficult and overwhelming situation, and I don't want to make it any worse than it already is. So if I were writing this in professional terms, I would say that Jack's tantrums occur most frequently during transitions from high preferred to low preferred tasks. The behavior would be maintained by escape from non-preferred demands and occasional access to extended time with the preferred activity. I would use terms such as antecedent variables that include abrupt transitions and removal of preferred items, as well as consequences that have historically included delayed task initiation and increased adult attention. I would also note that this is an example of behavior that has shaped and maintained its consequences, which is consistent with radical behaviorism, which ultimately emphasizes environmental variables over internal states as explanations for behavior. Now, for a parent, I didn't use terms such as antecedent, escape maintained, or motivating operations, because they're not going to be meaningful in this sense, and they might actually feel alienating or overwhelming, and they're just not terms used in everyday language that everyone understands. So for example, if I told the parent that Jack's tantrums are escape maintained behaviors evoked by transition demands, I would be accurate but not helpful in this sense, because it would just raise more questions from the parents. So I chose to say things such as Jack tantrums when moving from something fun to something less fun, and as well as the tantrum works to delay or avoid the hard activity, because these are everyday words that describe the same process without all of the extra jargon. And this is where I think balancing accuracy with accessibility is so important. I don't want to deny or dismiss the parent's experience or have them see Jack as moody, because that's what it feels like. Instead, I wanted to reframe it and explain what looks like mood is actually behavior serving a purpose, and emphasize the fact that all behavior is a form of communication. And I think this is consistent with radical behaviorism, because it avoids the hypothetical inner causes, but it also keeps the parent reassured. And I also didn't want to say that moods don't matter, because that could also feel invalidating. So instead, I wanted to acknowledge their perspective and kind of redirect to a more actionable explanation. I think as behavior analysts, it is our responsibility not to just analyze behavior, but also communicate our findings in a way that families can actually use in their daily lives. I believe that the science stays the same, but the words that we use make all the difference when communicating this to the parents, because not only does it affect the child, it affects them as well.